Hey everybody, I'm Doug and this is Doug Does Tech, and today I am rebuilding my home lab environment because my server that I use for all my stuff at home recently died and I got to replace the thing. And so I figured I'd bring you along as I go in and set this whole thing up. So let's dive into it and you can see how I set up my home lab, and if it helps you, great. If not, let me know how I could have done better. But it works for me, so this is the process I'm probably going to keep doing. So let's hop into it and let's start talking about setting up that home lab. So first thing first is, well, buying a server that you're going to actually use for running it. And you may already have a machine that you have at home, but if you don't, check out this website. I've used this for the last couple of labs that I've set up. It's labgopher.com, and it has essentially scoured eBay for all of the machines that are out for sale out in the wild. So you can get servers for incredibly cheap price with shipping to your house to build out that home lab. So I really would highly recommend this for everybody. For me, I kind of already know what I want in here, so I'm going to get some, a couple more CPUs. In my case, I went and bought one that had at least 250 gigs of RAM and, a couple different size factor items for me. I was important to have a 1U, and then I ended up buying a Dell machine. So here you can start filtering out this list and see exactly what you want to get and what fits in your budget. And they even have desktop versions that you can do. For me, I bought a Dell 720 or something like this for $600. And it's a great way to just get up and running and, oh, this is a 2U one. This isn't for me. But you can use this to come in, get up and running, buy a machine, and, get something in there. The only thing you got to be careful about with this site is some of these don't include drives. And so, when you're buying this, making sure you're paying attention to the fact that it has a hard drive and that the hard drive is something that you want to do. So that's the first step. Get yourself a machine, get it purchased, and get it to you. Next, we need to get an OS on it. So to do that, essentially what we're going to do is go download a free copy of Windows Server. So in here, we're going to just go and pull up Windows Server 2022 ISO. And Microsoft has free versions of Windows Server that you can take advantage of for lab purposes. So if you're getting started with it, you want to test some stuff out, just go on their evaluation center and you can get the latest version of Windows Server to try out for your environment. Obviously, this is for a lab only. Don't do this for your org. If you use this for too long, it will shut itself down automatically and cause yourself to have a bad day. I found one of my systems admin at one time had done this on one of our production machines, and it was a nightmare. So, just had to end up buying a license for the production machine, but don't do that. Use this only for lab purposes. Great way to take advantage of it. And you're just going to come in here and download an ISO copy of it. Okay. So that's step 2. Get the server, get your OS. Step 3 is when you get the machine here that's in your office, you got to format it. I really love using, I found it very helpful when you're formatting the machine, use Rufus to set up your bootable ISO disk. And so this can come in and create, the USB, put the ISO onto a USB so you can format the machine. And after all that, you can get up and running with your lab machine pretty quickly, get the physical stuff done, physical stuff out of the way. I always recommend setting up a RAID array for your drives. So if you get one with, at least 3-4 disks, you can do a RAID 5 in it or a RAID 10 on the device if your machine supports it. If it doesn't, don't worry about that. Get something in here that you're okay with using it. And so Rufus creates an ISO, takes that ISO that you downloaded from the evaluation center, puts it on a USB so that you can then format the machine. Great way to handle it. I'm not going to really do that because it's hard to film and I don't want to do that on camera. And so, essentially it's set up and ready to go. So my machine, I already did these couple steps. I bought it, I put an ISO on it, and then I just formatted it yesterday. Now I'm ready to set up the Hyper-V server and show you how I do the lab setups. So I'm going to pause here and get that up and running so that you can see and we can RDP into our machines. All right, so we're on our machine here, remoted in via RDP, and we're connected it up. To get to this point, I did need to come into Server Manager and enable remote access on the machine. So just come into here, switch it to allow remote connections to this machine, and you're good to go. Obviously, you need to set an IP address. So go on the machine and pull up your IP config and figure out like what is the network of the machine, and then you can RDP into it. That's all I did. Not a big step there, but now we're ready to go in and configure it. So first things that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change the name of this machine here just because I don't want it to be using the Windows default here. So we're gonna call this ATCK. All right, so TAC Lab 1, that's the site I'm in, which is my home lab here versus in my Azure lab, Hyper-V 401, right? So the first version of this in production. Hyper-V. All right, and so we're just gonna leave it as a work group here. So that's set. Now, next step that we need to do on here is do the network updates. So we want to come in here and start turning on updates on this machine so it can check in and do all of the updates in here. Eventually, you might want to do something more advanced like connecting it to Azure Arc, but that's essentially maybe something later. The last thing that I'm going to do on this before I have it do its reboot is I'm going to install Hyper-V on this machine and use this as my host. I'm going to host everything on this box. That's why I'm not doing this as a domain controller. So I'm going to install Hyper-V on it so that I can do all of the management stuff that I need on it. I'm not going to do a ton else on here. I am only going to set up the rest of this later after it's installed. But then this is, going to be one of those options that we're going to do here. And so in here, I'm going to browse here and we're going to go in and set up a new location. Oh, that's the USB drive. That's not what I wanted. You don't have to do this, but I just like to move it all into the C drive here. All right, and we're gonna have it automatically reboot. And so I'll come back after this is all done and ready to go. All right, so my Hyper-V host is installed and I'm ready to continue setting up. So I'm back onto the machine here, and now we're just simply gonna go into this and start setting up our home lab environment. I'm gonna do a full domain controller deployment, build it as if it was like its own contained network. So I'll do like I'll set up a DC on this machine, set up the network and all the switching, stuff like that. First thing to start is go to Tools in the top right, and then we're gonna hop into the Hyper-V Manager. This is where we're gonna build out all of our server lab and stuff like that. So whether you wanna test like Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, or any of the other Microsoft security stuff, or just maybe you need to demo out what happens if I make that change to Active Directory. You can do it very containerized in here. Typically what you're gonna do is you wanna go in before you start building out your virtual machines. You're gonna wanna set up the switch and start controlling kind of all of that options for it of like how it's gonna connect to the internet, how it's gonna do all of this kind of stuff in here. I'm gonna do it via script, right? And so it's in here, I have this kind of scripted out. I wanna do some custom stuff into it. So I'm gonna have my lab network basically have its own set of IP addresses, but I want it to be able to access the internet. Usually if you don't do the script option, you're locked down to doing it manually, controlling the internet remotely and that kind of stuff in here, or having no internet connection, which is fine for a lot of labs, but for mine, I want to be able to update them. I want to be able to control them and stuff like that. So let's just go ahead and run this script real quick. And basically what I'm doing with this is I'm declaring out the subnets that this lab will be in here. And so just like that, we're good to go. And now we can start building out our virtual machine. And the first thing that we always set up is going to be our domain controller in here. So we're going to set up the domain controller, go to new, and begin the process of setting it up. So we're going to call this demo lab DC01, and we're going to store it in where we put everything else in there. I'm going to do a Gen 2 machine on this one, and I'm going to give it, what is it? Let's do a calculator. We're going to give it 8 gigs of RAM to start with, so 8192, right? And we're not going to do virtual RAM for a NIC. And then this network that we have in here, that's the lab network that we set up previously. And then for ISO, so setting up this is the hard drive. So, on here, I'm going to start limiting the hard drive and what we can do. And then same thing that we did before, we're going to use the same ISO previously that we had on the machine to basically control, the box. So go continue, grab that same update ISO that we did before, put it on your Hyper-V host, and then we can configure that. I'm going to pause here and then come back after it's installed, and that way we can adjust this. Actually, one thing before I forget, before you boot that machine the first time, you noticed we didn't get a chance to set up in the WYSIWYG how much processing power that has. Before you boot your machine and before you install the OS on it, you need to come back in and do that here. Adjust that for whatever you're going to have it to be in your environment. I'm going to set this to 6 processors and start it. Okay, and now I'm going to install it on this machine. So set it up, do all the things so I can configure it in here. And then obviously, if you're going to do that in your environment, just run through the kind of the same config like you did with booting the machine. So I'm going to pause again and come back to this. That way, I can see it once it's started up. All right, so I finished setting up my machine. It's installed and we're ready to go ahead and log in. So here we can go ahead and get this on and see if I can get the password right. That's embarrassing. Always the struggle to get the password right on a virtual machine. And first thing we need to set up in here is you can see it's not connected to the internet. It doesn't know any of our network settings. It's because we're in that that new network that we just created that is locked out here. So we're gonna manually set the IP addresses so we can communicate out to the internet. So obviously we're gonna open up the network share settings and go ahead and configure that. And so we're just going to go ahead and disable IPv6 just out of habit. And then we're going to set the IP address manually of it. So 192.168.201.10, and numlock is not on, so that's great. 192.168.201.10. So I'm going to just randomly, I'm picking a set address that I do, and this is the one that I usually do for all of my domain controllers. And so we're going to do 255, right? Same for this, it's sub 32. And then the default gateway is going to be kind of this IP address here that we picked in our network here. So again, 192.168.201.1. And for the DNS servers, we're just going to set this to 127.0.0.1. It's going to set to local because we're going to go configure that. It's going to be its own DNS server in a little bit, right? We're going to install DHCP on it. And just like that, we now have the network configured, and hopefully we should be able to reach out to the internet. We'll see if we did this right here. Always the good test is pull up command line. And let's see if we can ping out. Yep. And so we got to ping out to Google. And so we should be able to, go on the internet here and start setting stuff up. Confirm, close. I probably don't have a DNS server actually. I picked a random DNS server, so I don't have that because I was thinking about it already. Got too far ahead of myself. Not going to work until you go and set your DNS to a set address like Google or something like that. All right, computer's online, has internet connection. Let's go ahead and do the rest of the setups, and we're going to promote this to be a domain controller in here. So we're going to do this, add a role to this, and we're going to set it up to be a domain, Active Directory domain services. All right. And then we're also going to do a DHCP server and a DNS server all in one. And the point of this is that we're going to set this DC up so that everything else that we join to this network, whether it be a server or a VM or whatever, it's going to be essentially the cornerstone of setting up this lab to handle all of this. So we're going to install those 3 main roles into this so that we can do everything that we need to on this box in here. Okay. So we're going to add that in next. And we're going to go ahead and restart that server if we need it. All right, so I'll pause there and come back once it's done installing. I'll probably set the server name because this WinK9 is no good here. And so as soon as that's done, I'll restart the video. All right, so I finished installing the roles, and so next we need to promote this to a domain controller. And so we're gonna add a new forest in here. And so we should be able to set this up pretty quickly and add all of this into this. So give it a second and we should be able to do this. So we're gonna do a folder, and what are we gonna call the domain? So we're gonna call this ATCK, we'll just call it Demo Lab. We've been calling it Demo Lab. 1.com. All right. And so we're going to pick that new forest name. Obviously, you can pick whatever you want on this in here. I'm going to do, obviously, forest level 2016, and then we need to pick a password for this. Okay. Can't do that. There's always so many domain controller things that I don't remember how to do exactly, but I think we can get pretty close on this the first try through. So picking the NetBIOS name, so that'd be like the short name of it without the .com, all of that in here. I'm going to use all of this kind of default stuff for all of like the database and log files on that. And then, that should be pretty fine for it. And so we can set that up pretty quickly and we should be good to. After this, we're going to do the DHCP. And so again, I'll come back in a second. Oh, looks like that's done. And once I reboot again and I'm able to log in with the domain controller credentials, then we'll set up DNS and DHCP and all that jazz. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. All right, so I just finished setting up all the domain controller stuff. And so log back in it. And so now we're going to be using and setting up the DHCP. So here we can walk through this and set this up. So we're going to use our regular credentials for it, and that's going to be the credentials it's going to use to set it up. And just like that, we're good to go. So now it should be in here, and let's complete the configuration. Come on. And let's just maybe go ahead and open it, and we'll do everything in the raw configs here. Perfect. All right, so nothing is in here now. And so we're just going to create a new scope for it and set it up. So all right, so the IP address range again was so 192.168.201.1. End range is going to be the 255. So 192.168.201.255. 254. Yeah. Next. All right, so exclusions. I'm going to add some exclusions. I don't want to give out these IP address ranges as we're deploying it. So it's going to be like your set thing. So normally on your like server network, it's going to be like all of your set ranges that like you statically assign. So for me, I'm going to do 192.168.201 to 192.168.201.11. Right, and so this server is 10, and so we're going to exclude our gateway and all of this kind of stuff in here. 8-hour release times. Yes, I want to configure the rest of the options. So the router, right, the gateway, that's going to be how does everybody get out to the internet. So 192.168.201.1. Add that. And I think that's good on that front. Win server. I think this would be the same as my DC. 201.10. I think that's right. And I think we should be good to. Yes, I want to activate this scope afterwards. And I think that is everything that we need on here. So let's just check it out to make sure it's active. And let's check our server options here. So 1 to 10, router, DNS server, subdomain, Win server. I don't think we need this Win server thing. I don't think that's necessary. I probably should delete it. We'll leave it for now. If you find that you have problems with it, or if you know better, if the Win server is needed, let me know. I don't remember exactly what that's for. But regardless, I'm going to keep it in there and have it set up. Last thing we want to do as part of this lab environment is configure DNS. So let's just go ahead and check that out and go ahead and set that up. And really what we're looking to configure is making sure everything reaches out to the proper IP addresses range for DNS, right? So all of my network is going to be looking at this DC to do DNS, right? That's why I'm adding it in DHCP, DNS, and domain controller service all in one box. But this doesn't know where to reach out to go get the addresses. So if I put in google.com, it's going to fail on me. And so we need to configure the DNS to reach out to, the internet. So I always use Google's DNS servers, just because that's the one I like the most. You could use Cloudflare's, which is like 1.1.1. You should also set up a secondary if you're doing this in production. So Google's is like 4.4.4. Everything is also the Google one. So, just set it up, follow some best practice on the DNS stuff, and I think you should be good. And then you're set, right? So we're gonna apply that to this, and that should be it from kind of the setup perspective. So let's just go and see if we can get to the internet and if we can have that work here. Yep, so I think we're good. All right, so that is the full setup of my lab environment. Now I'm ready to add in all the other servers that I want to do from a test perspective. The DC is set up, all of that kind of stuff. If I want to start creating some fake usernames, all I got to do is start opening up domain controller services, and I can start setting up everything. So Active Directory, domain, add some user accounts, add some test accounts. I can then also go and mount and add in some clients and configure all that. That's a really basic lab environment setup. And so if this helped you, awesome. Let me know if you want other things set up in your lab. Reach out. I'm probably going to set up like MDE, Defender for Endpoint, as well as Defender for Identity in this lab environment. I'll film myself doing it, and then essentially kind of go from there, adding in all those kind of fun other stuff. Maybe we'll set up Sentinel as well. So if you found this helpful, again, let me know. And if you have requests of demos to set up, reach out. Good luck, everybody, and stay safe out there.